Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another Dissidia Final Fantasy Auron video. Today we are taking on the not Dare to Defy, the Dimensions and Reprise. So this is stage 5. So what I decided to run here is I wanted to use Auron. I brought Serah as just like a support character, and since she was on the banner, she will not get she won't take up a slot, right? So that's the one like kind of nicer thing about Reprise as opposed to other lockout content is as long as you use featured characters, they do not actually lock out. So Auron and Serah here aren't actually getting locked out. I'm free to use them as much as I want. Quina's kind of the extra one I'm taking, and the reason I decided to take Quina, I just very quickly, like very briefly looked at the boss info, and I saw something about like reduction, so I'm like, I don't know, whatever. If they try to do some type of like boss cheese and I didn't feel like reading, I'm like, we'll just have Quina effect going. And I thought Quina would be nice because Quina has off-turn traps that would work maybe really nice during like an Auron force, just to help like extra damage during force time. Quina's traps I don't think would actually tick Auron because they're not melee damage, but it's still just like extra damage going during force time, right? Well, as it turned out, the fight kind of went so crazy that I never got to put Quina's traps on. So there was a point where I was going to, and I pressed the wrong button by mistake, but it ended up being a good thing. So we'll get there when we get there. I'll kind of talk about that point. The main, I mean, out of what I saw in this fight, right? Like the main thing is that the bosses do like this needle attack that's like a gravity attack. And when I first saw it, I didn't know if it was a gravity attack, but it took my life down a ton. And then I took a second one, which you're going to see here in a few minutes. We'll take them here when they come up. But then I took a second one when I was really low on health. And I thought I was going to die, and I didn't. And that's when I realized it was just a gravity attack. Now, Auron is kind of completely fine through it because like whenever he counters, he heals himself back up pretty good. But the other party members aren't getting like enough HP regen to really power through it. So because I brought a team without a healer, it was really important to have healing calls. And thankfully I had the foresight to, just in case I did bring healing calls, because anytime I bring a party without a healer, I always make it a point to bring 1 or 2 healing calls. And it ended up working out for me, right? Alright, so the force gauge is going pretty good. I think I'm going to do an Auron burst phase. I'm pretty sure is what I do here is I do a full Auron burst to like kind of push me towards my force time, right? Yep. Oh, not quite yet. Or yeah, I think I'm about to. I did the AA first. I did go and pre-record this one, by the way, so I kind of know how the fight went. Yep, so we go into Auron burst phase. So the reason I do this is for 2 reasons. One is, once again, I said this before, Auron is kind of like one of these setup burst phase type characters. He's not a character where I don't know that you'd want to go into his burst for damage, because I think even with his really strong HP plus, like it's still not competitive with like actual like, mainline damage dealers. So for Auron, I think if you're going to use his burst, you do it like I'm doing here, where we just do it to like pop a bunch of skills, get all of his buffs up, and then to just get the BT effect up, and then it's also giving us time to force charge, build up our force gauge with the enemies not moving up on theirs. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And you know, I brought Quina too, who I did think about going into Quina's first setup, but I decided not to. My thought was we would do Auron, because Auron I potentially would maybe want to use both of his burst effects, or get his burst buff up twice, but I don't think it really came into play. These bosses, you can see these Dimensions and Reprise fights, what I've noticed so far is the bosses aren't very tanky. They go down quite quickly. So I'm thinking these are kind of like straight rerun fights without anything really added to them. And I do think it's kind of odd that there's a bunch of Lufenia fights mixed in, right? So like, and maybe, I guess, here's the thing. So like as a veteran player who loves Dare to Defy, like I would be fine if this was like straight Shinryu the whole way. I would be fine if it was full lockout, whatever. I think what they're doing with this is they're trying to find a balance, because there are a lot of players that don't like Dare to Defy, right? And these are maybe newer players or players without as big of a roster. So I can see the good in this event, even though I see the Lufenias as being very pointless, especially because I can just run boosted characters and like free clear those, no problem. They're super easy anyways. It's almost like, why are they there? But then when I really thought about it, well, the reason why they're there, it's for a different player base, right? It's for players that maybe have trouble with Shinryu, but then there's some fights in here they can beat. So overall, like I didn't want to look through this like this Dimensions and Reprise through one lens and say, oh, I don't like it. I think realistically it is good, because it's still pseudo-lockout content, but I think this is meant to maybe appease the newer players and the players that don't like Dare to Defy as much. I think this is a good balance because we're still going to get a good amount of Shinryu fights. There's still lockout if I want to go outside of featured characters, but for those players that have smaller rosters, this gives them options, right? Because if they just pull a good core of new boosted characters, they potentially could get through all the Shinryus and they can reuse those characters, right? Auron, for example, a really good character now that you just have access to on all these fights, and being a tank, he's going to be a very safe, good character you can bring to keep your party safe, do counter damage, things like that. So I think this is a good balance. And, you know, at the very most, I would say most players will be able to beat the Lufenias. And there's like, if you look at the whole list of fights, even though they're not unlocked, you can see what they are. A lot of the fights are Lufenia, so this will allow, you know, newer players to go through and get a good chunk of the rewards without even needing to beat a Shinryu. So I think it's good. I think it's a fun, and they're trying something new. Yeah, there goes the gravity attack. So you can see my health is constantly like really low. Luckily, anything single target, Auron kind of just blocks and takes care of. He heals himself back up on his counters pretty good. And since those needle attacks don't actually kill me, I'm actually okay here. The big thing, like I said, for me was that I needed to make sure that I had healing calls. Now, we ended up getting really lucky. We'll just say I got my call off at literally like the last second. It almost like I almost accidentally killed them before I had a chance to heal, and it would have been really bad. But, you know, I was looking at their thresholds, and I'm like, well, I got to get through that last threshold, because my guess is they're doing these needle attacks at every single threshold. So my thought was there's no point in healing before the last threshold, because if they needle attack me, it's going to put me too low. I need to meet that HP requirement. So yeah, at this point, we've got everyone's BT effects up. I believe we're in Auron's force is what we used, yeah. And this works out just fine, even in like, you know, maybe not the best setup for Auron himself, and maybe not the most aggressive fight. Auron is still just like a really nice third slot member, you know. So we talked about him during the character guide, and I did a solo fight with him just talking about how dominant he can be in that type of team comp. But Auron, like these tanks, what's good about him is like you can literally just bring them, right? Like you can just bring them. You can do a traditional offensive team. Like I could have a Tifa and then maybe a Rosa and then an Auron, and Auron will still function well. I might not use Auron's force as the main force, but like the counter damage is good during any type of force time, right? It's just you're not doing that really aggressive ramp from the enemies, but you could aggressively ramp other ways and still get ridiculous counter damage. So you know, don't think that these tanks are one-dimensional, can only be used in certain types of fights. The other thing, too, is because what you notice when I did these very aggressive fights, very defensive-type fights, Auron didn't even really need his HP+. Like, we didn't even really get opportunities to use it. So if you use him in a more traditional team comp, you actually can press that button and do some good on-turn damage. So I said this before, Auron is definitely not a must-pull, but if you're lacking a tank, I think he's a very good pickup. But yeah, if you've got Rubicante, Beatrix, you know, characters like that, you definitely don't need them, right? You definitely don't have to have Auron. For me, he's kind of like a fan-favorite character. I just really like him, and luckily I got pretty lucky on the pulls, I would say. It actually wasn't that bad, so I'll definitely take the luck that I got, for sure. And we came out of there with that extra Serah BT. I just have to figure out what I want. I'm going to just hold it for now, and if I get to the point that I'm desperate for an ingot, I might just put a book in it, which is unfortunate because you can't sell them once you put a book in it. The DFFOO really needs to fix that or change that. And who knows, maybe they haven't, I didn't know about it, but I'm pretty sure they haven't changed that. So, nothing in my roster shows as sellable that has a book in it. Alright, so here's like kind of the end, right? And you can see we're still on turn 8, like, we get by just fine. I just wanted to get past that threshold, right? So I'm like, alright, we just need a turn. Quina's coming up, I'm going to heal and we're good, right? That's kind of what I'm thinking here. But it's like, oh, Auron comes in and counters, we're doing a lot of damage. You know, both of these needle showers are off turn. So what happened here that made it really dicey is Auron did those double counters and these enemies are getting really close to dead. I'm like, just give me the Quina turn. And then the B enemy has to take their actual turn. And I'm like, dude, just give me a turn because Quina has a healing call. Just give me Quina. And then Auron comes up again, kills one. We're at 1%. on the left enemy. So I'm like, oh my gosh, we just need to heal. And I'm like, thank God I got this Luna Freya call. Let's heal it up and hope that it's enough. Which it looks like it is, right? Like our health is pretty good now. And I'm like, all right, now we can just press a button. And I'm like, sure, now we'll put the traps on. So there was a point earlier in the fight where I meant to put the traps on, but I echoed with Quina instead. And it ended up being good because Quina's force canceled their thing. Like it stopped their force gauge. So it actually ended up being pretty good. So anyways, guys, there you go. There's my Dimensions on Reprise Stage 5. Let me know how you handle this fight. Thanks for watching. We'll catch y'all on the next one.